Welcome, sleepless spirit. I'm your storyteller tonight, here to guide you gently into the shadows of slumber, where dreams take over and worries fade away. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more bedtime tales, whispered just for you. Let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it as you listen tonight? And if there's a story you've been longing to hear, something spooky, something comforting, tell me. I'm always listening. Now, tuck yourself in. Let the darkness wrap around you like a warm blanket. It's time to let go and drift into the story. I'm Elian Baker, and I've been a truck driver for over 10 years at this point in my career. While it's not the most exciting job in the world, it does allow me to travel. So I found myself in the middle of nowhere, driving steadily along the winding roads that crisscross rural Pennsylvania. That fateful night was similar to any other night during my long-haul trips in that it kept me from going bankrupt while also meeting my basic needs. However, there was one small but important detail I had prepared an unplanned surprise for. My best friend from high school, Ron Davis. Over time, Ron and I drifted apart as after graduation, our paths parted, but we remained close via social media and phone calls. I learned that he had moved to a small, charming town not far from my route, so I made the decision to pay him an unexpected visit. As midnight drew near, I ended up at a convenience store in Ron, stopping by to get a quick late-night snack and fill up my rig's fuel tank in my sleepy town of residence, Hamlet, where nothing seemed to be happening. I texted Ron to ask for his address, so we could meet up for a few beers at his place. Little did I know that this seemingly ordinary pit stop would start a series of events that would change throughout my life. As I munched on crispy chips and drank hot coffee to keep warm, I noticed the teenage girls huddled outside the gas pumps. They seemed to be deeply engaged in conversation, occasionally glancing at me, which piqued my interest because it was unusual for them to be there at that late hour in such a mundane setting. After exchanging uncertain glances, one of them said, "Actually, we could use a ride across town. It's not too far from here." Town curiosity overtook caution as I walked towards them and offered assistance, needing some help almost instantly. Their chatter abetted as they eyed me suspiciously. A battle of wits ensued within me as I evaluated the benefits and drawbacks of offering to total strangers a ride in my truck. On the one hand, I couldn't get rid of the persistent thought that it might not be a good idea, but on the other hand, I reasoned that it was only a short distance away, and that helping someone in need was a nice gesture. In the end, my altruistic nature won out, and I consented to give them as soon as we got in the car. The girls immediately expressed how relieved they were to no longer have to drive around the streets at night. They told me about the recent spike in robberies and assaults in the area, which made me shiver, but I took comfort in the fact that they were no longer left to drive these dangerous streets. As I was thinking these things alone, an unexpected visitor joined our journey. A mysterious black car appeared in my rearview mirror, following uncomfortably close while blaring its high beams nervously. I turned to my passengers and asked them where the car came from and who it might be. My voice trembled a little as I asked, started to build within me. One of the girls looked at her friend in concern before confessing, "We honestly don't know, but we've noticed it tailing us for a while now." Determined to protect them, I tried to remain calm and focused on getting to our destination as we approached a barren area nearby. A terrifying turn of events led to an abandoned warehouse. The black car quickly accelerated and swerved recklessly in front of us, and I had to quickly apply the brakes to avoid colliding. The driver's door swung open, and the tall man, who was dressed entirely in black, emerged. His hostile attitude was instantly evident as he rushed toward my truck with menacing steps while brandishing a threatening crowbar above his head. His raised voice reverberated through the night air, and I could not understand what he was saying from where I was. An adrenaline rush ran through my veins as panic struck, and I hurried to get help. From my phone and dialed 911 in an effort to buy time and make sense of this beloved scene. I rolled down my window a little and yelled, "What do you want?" to the approaching man. His eyes narrowed, and his voice became even darker as he growled back, "You know exactly what I want." But I was completely perplexed and couldn't understand the reason behind his menacing approaches or find any relevance to the events taking place in front of me. The terrified girls huddled tightly in their seats showed no acquaintance or connection to the enigmatic man who had approached us. As I struggled to process what was happening, a sudden blare of police sirens pierced the air through the atmosphere of detention, which gave me a great opportunity to act. I pressed the gas pedal on my truck and drove away as quickly as the car could go without stopping out of an instinctive need for safety. It wasn't until I arrived at Ron's place, a far-off and secure location, that soon after we arrived, pursuit police officers showed up at our sanctuary and, in accordance with protocol, started questioning each of us separately as we related our terrifying experience. During these interviews, we discovered that the insane person who had threatened our lives was none other than Elijah Harrington, who was well known in the community for his lengthy criminal history and vicious behavior, was now leading a vicious gang that preyed on unwary travelers along remote roads by committing robberies, assaults, and other horrible crimes. Harrington was dishonestly using young girls as accomplices in his twisted schemes. He enticed potential victims by telling them that they would receive something of value as they stopped and assisted their targets. The police arrested the two girls, and I can't even begin to imagine what they might have done if they hadn't arrived at that precise moment. The girls each had a pocket knife. These strategies demonstrated his cunning and the lengths he would go to in order to exert control over others. Fortunately, no one was hurt on that terrible night, and I was able to get away thanks to a combination of quick thinking and pure luck. But the memory of that night's terrifying is a poignant lesson. My experience has taught me to be more vigilant and cautious when traveling alone, but also to be aware that not everyone we encounter possesses good intentions. The events continue to haunt me relentlessly, serving as a constant reminder of just how dangerously close we came to becoming pawns in Elijah Harrington's sadistic game. My name is Nick Harrington, and I've been driving trucks for the past 15 years. I've seen my share of oddities on the road, but nothing really prepared me for what was about to happen that night. Thank you for your good intentions. Innocently enough, the drive began when I picked up a new load of cargo in Portland, Oregon, and headed to Salt Lake City, Utah. On the way, I had intended to stop in Boise, Idaho, for dinner with an old friend of mine, Marcus Reed, who used to drive for the same company, but had since moved to Boise with his wife and children. But I still desired to rock out to Springsteen on those endless highways with my co-pilot, an overweight mud named Rambo. Rambo was a rescue dog who had been placed in shelter after shelter before he was able to find a home with me. The sun had just set an hour ago, and Rambo was happily cuddling up to me, and we were about an hour outside of Boise when things took an unexpected turn. The cab's speakers were blasting Born to Run, and I noticed a broken-down minivan on the side of the road with a group of people huddled nearby. While it's common to see people in need of help on highways, there was something about this group that unnerved me. Perhaps it was because they seemed composed about their predicament, but once more, my instincts told me to keep going. Sometimes, it's difficult to be a good Samaritan when you've heard a lot of terrifying stories from other truckers. After a few miles, I couldn't get rid of the nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach, and Rambo whined next to me sensed I finally gave in to my guilt and conscience and called 911 to report the stranded group. While on the phone, I noticed headlights coming from another car in my rearview mirror. Hoping they would stop to help, I felt a wave of relief that there was a good chance those people would receive the help they needed. But my relief would be during our brief stop at a roadside diner just outside of Boise. I met Marcus and started telling him about my experience. Rambo remained in the truck contentedly munching on some dog treats while we ate dinner, at which point Marcus shared with me a story he had heard from another driver. Apparently, multiple drivers had been brutally murdered on this. The room appeared to darken as Marcus revealed these graphic details, and I couldn't help but think that I might have just missed being killed in one of the recent vicious attacks on a particular stretch of highway that came as a surprise. The police had discovered a pattern. Each victim had communicated with a group of hitchhikers just before they died. Rambo was barking maniacally at 3 shadowy figures that were menacingly lurking around my truck, the same group I'd encountered earlier. As part of those statistics sent shivers down my spine, I'm beginning to realize that this was no coincidence. Our conversation was interrupted by the sound of glass breaking outside the diner, and we rushed out in adrenaline-fueled confusion. Frozen in terror and dumbfounded, we watched as 2 of them broke the truck's windscreen before driving away without exchanging a single look or word. This seemingly senseless act of violence seemed to be directed at me, and as I stared at the broken glass on the ground, Marcus, Rambo and I swiftly examined the truck's cab to evaluate the damage. We returned to the diner and promptly told the proprietor of what had happened. The proprietor promptly called the police, but given how rapidly everything had happened, we didn't have much faith that they would get there in time to take any action. Marcus persuaded me to stay the night. My mind was racing with fear and uncertainty as I tried to fall asleep that night, but ended up tossing and turning instead. The following morning, after barely getting any sleep, I decided to continue on my journey, because staying at his house until we could decide our next steps felt somewhat safer than being alone in my truck or staying at a hotel room. Regardless, Marcus insisted that I report everything that had happened, so I called my boss and informed them of these disturbing events. As I drove towards Salt Lake City on this seemingly endless drive, the surrounding landscape grew more bleak and menacing, and my senses were so sharply alerted by fear that every unexpected movement or flash of eye jumped just outside of Salt Lake City when I noticed something frighteningly familiar. Another group of hitchhikers standing close to what appeared to be a stranded car on the side of the road. The scene was uncannily similar to what I had seen before, but this time it seemed different and sinister in some way. I had to take action because I couldn't ignore it, but after what had happened the previous evening, I knew that confronting them head-on was not an option. Instead, I chose to pull over where I could still see them without getting too close to attract their attention. I waited and watched with my heart racing as my suspicions were confirmed that it was the same car that had left the scene, and after nearly 40 minutes of terrified observation, a police cruiser appeared in the area. The group milled about for a few minutes, apparently waiting for someone, and continued to scan the roads for any approaching vehicles. I struggled to control my fear and anger and forced myself to remain hidden in wait. Marcus had been working hard to get some action on this hazardous section of road since I called them last night. It seemed like on cue, the predatory group jumped into their car and ran away in a cloud of dust, leaving their new potential victims behind. The police pursued them assiduously, while others returned to take me in, for in a strange turn of events, Marcus's perseverance in pursuing this matter led to the creeper group's capture a few days later. Horrifying evidence found in their possession journals, detailing planned attacks on unwary drivers and graphic pictures of their victims revealed that they were involved in a vicious game where they had attacked truckers for amusement or retaliation, because there had always been an inexplicable allure to driving across the country during the darkest hours with the open road. And my diligence that day, supported by Marcus's unwavering support from a distance, had prevented this cold-blooded group from taking more lives. It all started on a fateful night when I picked up a hitchhiker named Clive Wilkerson. As a seasoned truck driver, I had grown accustomed to the alluring embrace of long-haul drives, and the road stretched before me like an endless abyss, with the stars above serving as my silent witnesses. However, nothing could have prepared me for my encounter with Clive, who was unquestionably strange. His bushy beard covered a large portion of his face, and although he seemed harmless enough, there was something about him that made me uneasy. Nevertheless, I welcomed the idea of sharing my lonely journey through this. He wore thick glasses that conveyed a look of perpetual disbelief. His speech pattern was peculiar, as if he were constantly chasing his own breath. Lonely section of the Kansas highway, and as each mile went by, we shared stories about our lives' trials and victories expertly woven into the fabric of our individual histories. I spoke kindly of Marta, my wife of 15 years, and delighted in remembering our common experiences. Clive then shared information about his. He revealed that his abrupt departure from that world had been cloaked in secrecy, and that he was now being pursued by the same company that had previously hired him. As our conversation progressed, there was a noticeable strain in the atmosphere between us, and Clive's agitation increased steadily. Our conversation came to a sudden halt when we heard a thunderous impact against the side of the truck. Alarmed, I stomped on the brakes, screaming the enormous vehicle to a stop on the highway shoulder. His voice was pronounced, and he gradually gave in to the tension that gripped him. His eyes began to wander nervously around the cab, as though seeking some unseen danger. I gripped my flashlight tightly as I stepped out of the taxi in search of clues that might explain the terrifying incident. It was amid this barren strip of asphalt that I discovered something genuinely terrifying: a battered figure. We exchanged terrified looks, our haunted expressions silently reflecting our mutual uncertainty. The man in front of me was collapsed by the side of the road. His black suit was ragged and bloody, and his face was twisted into a horrifying richness of pain and terror. His eyes met mine as he managed to make a feeble cry for assistance, while gasping for air in a panic. I turned to look at Clive, who was still sitting still in the truck. Time weighed heavily on me like an incomprehensible burden that threatened to crush everything beneath its relentless pressure, driven by instinct. I dialed 911 and realized the enormity of the situation, looking as pale as any spectre. Could it be that this man lying before me had played some sinister role in Clive's inscrutable fear? Told a dispatcher about the incident with shaking fingers, and they did their best to reassure me that help was on the way. However, as I turned to look at the injured man with growing fear, I noticed something that appeared to support my suspicions. Emblazoned on his suit was an unmistakable logo, the same one that was displayed on the building where Clive, after completing his research. I looked back at the truck to discover that Clive had vanished from his location. A note reading, "I'm sorry, but I can't stay, trust no one," was found there. The distant sirens startled me, and I was startled out of my reverie when I noticed a police car and an ambulance arrive. My thoughts raced as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. I told the officers about my acquaintance with Clive, the details of the injured man we had found, and everything I knew up until that point. Their faces showed skepticism and doubt. They took my statement and told me they would get in touch with me if several days after the incident more information was needed, and I was plagued by the feeling that I was being watched all the time. I felt like someone was following me everywhere. I went, and my rational side attempted to dismiss it as simple paranoia, but deep down I knew that it was true. One fateful night, while driving down a hauntingly desolate section of the Arizona highway, a shadowy figure appeared on the side of the road. As I got closer, the figure stepped into the light from my headlights and revealed a face that made me shudder. It was Clive. He looked worn out, and his beard was stubbled. Clive, looking disheveled and his clothes in tatters, got into the cab beside me, and we drove down the dimly lit highway while he started to tell me about the terrible events that had happened after our last encounter. He had been employed by a pharmaceutical company that had been covertly carrying out unethical experiments on the man we encountered during our fateful roadside encounter. Was one of the pharmaceutical company's agents sent with the sole purpose of killing Clive as he told his story in silence. They used human subjects without their consent, and when Clive revealed their heinous intentions, they mocked him as a target for elimination. Whispers I felt a chill slice through my spine in Clive, I saw a weary individual who had found himself in a realm of sinister darkness following his discovery of an unimaginable truth. A formidable organization bent on maintaining the secrecy of their shady interests above all else hunted him relentlessly. We drove deeper into the night, weighed down by the sinister air that now surrounded us. I saw headlights in my rearview mirror as a car sped through the darkness, approaching our truck like a predator closing in on its prey. I saw the emblem on the car's hood, which was definitely that of the pharmaceutical company. In an instant, the sinister vehicle veered into our lane, pushing us off the road. Dazed and confused, I realized that I had miraculously survived as our truck barreled over an asphalt roadway several times before finally coming to a stop in a large ditch next to the highway. My eyes then shifted to Clive, who was now unconscious and heavily bleeding from a large wound on his head. Realizing that we were far from safe, we hid from our pursuers in the nearby woods, which were shaded by trees and bushes. As their approaching footsteps grew louder, I silently prayed that their search would be fruitless and used all of my strength to carry Clive out of the wreckage and into the desolate woods. With great reluctance and difficulty, I decided to temporarily leave Clive behind, and my promise to send help echoed in my mind as time seemed to drag on at an excruciating pace until finally the sounds of pursuit faded away into the distance. As each minute went by, it became evident that staying hidden was not a sustainable solution. It felt like fate was testing me, sending me endless twists and turns at every chance to bend me to its will. Only time would tell if I had the strength to fight it. As I slithered through the underbrush, my heart thudded in my chest, each pounding beat echoing the fear coursing through me. Finally, I came upon a small gas station, strength to endure and weather the storm. But what really motivated me at that point was not only my survival, but also demonstrating that Clive's faith in me had not been misplaced. Our once peaceful journey turned into a nightmare as I rushed through the gas station's entrance in a panic, and the attendant stared at my unkempt appearance but was unable to question my intentions in a hurry. I told him about our predicament and asked for his assistance in calling the police, which he did without hesitation. As I waited for the police, I looked around nervously, unable to get rid of the feeling that we were still being watched. When the authorities showed up, I adamantly told them our horrific situation, exposing our agonizing predicament and Clive's present location. Even though it seemed like invisible eyes were watching us every move concealed from view, this barren environment dread engulfed me like a dense fog, obfuscating any semblance of calm or reason. With every second that went by, our sense of urgency increased as we ventured deeper into the dark woods, which were filled with a foreboding atmosphere. As we approached Clive's location, I clung to the hope that he would not be discovered by our pursuers while I was away. The policeman, who was skeptical, agreed to accompany me back to where I had left Clive. One night, I was totally preoccupied with driving my vehicle along when I noticed Clive's lifeless body stretched among the bushes, blood pooling beneath him. My stomach knotted with disgust and remorse upon realizing that his fate was now set. In those moments of solitude, the dim glow of my dashboard lights kept me company while the late-night radio show took a commercial break. It was a typical day for a trucker like me, Polly Harrington, who had been working 4 hours on end on the interstate highway. I have over 20 years of experience, as after working as a truck driver for a while, it was hard not to get occasionally carried away by nostalgia. The wonderful memories I had of the many places I had been and the many friendships I had made abroad kept me going through many lonely nights. As I was driving through Arkansas, my mind drifted to an old friend named Terry Grimes. Terry and I first met many when Terry quit trucking to start a family and live a more domestic life. Our bond naturally deteriorated. As I forged to head down the interstate, curiosity nodded at me, urging me to wonder about Terry's current state. Years ago, we met at a truck stop, and our chemistry was instantaneous. During my ruminations, I noticed, given that it was late, and that this specific stretch of highway was especially desolate. I decided it was only right to assist someone in need when I saw a car pull over on the side of the road with its hazard lights blinking menacingly and slow down a little to assess the situation further. A woman standing next to her car looked quite upset. "Truck," I casually got out and said, "Hey mum, do you need some assistance?" The woman looked young, perhaps in her mid-20s, with striking auburn hair framing her questioning eyes. She sighed in relief when she saw me. "Oh, thank goodness you stopped." Her name was Lisa, and she sincerely introduced herself. My car decided it was time to give up on life, and I can't seem to figure out what's wrong with it. After carefully examining her to make sure her intentions were sincere, I decided to lend her a hand, armed with my flashlight. I looked at her engine to find the problem, and soon I found that when I broke the bad news to her that the alternator was entirely broken, I added, "I'm afraid there's not much hope for your alternator. It's toast. It's beyond repair, and you're going to need a tow as anticipated." Lisa appeared even more upset. "I don't have any money for a tow," I continued. Before offering her a solution, I thought about the situation for a while. "Well, I can drop you off at the next town if you like," I suggested. She seemed interested, but hesitant, so I went ahead before her doubts could take hold. "There's a mechanic friend of mine who works there. He might be able to get you sorted," is how she responded dejectedly, thankful for the generous offer. Lisa accepted without hesitation before we started our journey. We gathered her belongings from her dead car and got into my truck. And as we continued to drive down the interstate, I felt a wave of satisfaction, as though I'd helped someone, even if only slightly. Lisa and I, who were left stranded, started a friendly conversation as we set out on our journey together. We talked about everything from our individual musical preferences to our family histories. As each mile went by, the brief encounter between two strangers seemed to unfold into an unexpected gift. With our roads to the open road stretching out in front of us, the tail lights glowed and faded in the distance, like fireflies dancing through a moonlit field as Lisa and I bonded over shared laughter and thoughtful conversations. This chance encounter reminded me of the extraordinary characters that have colored my life, each one leaving their distinctive mark on the fabric of my story as we traveled mile after mile along the barren Arkansas highway, neither of us anticipating the detours that would be ahead of us. We forged closer bonds with one another, sharing both happy and vulnerable moments as the truck's headlights blazed a hazy trail through the increasing darkness. As Lisa and I shared more stories and life experiences that night, our sense of camaraderie only deepened. With each story, I felt like I knew her a little better, and the miles seemed to go by faster. As the last hour of our trip drew near, I grew more exhausted from the long hours spent behind, sensing my weariness. Lisa generously offered to make us both coffee using a thermos she had taken from her car. I was grateful for the gesture and yearned for something warm to combat my weariness, so I accepted her offer and gave her my cup. She then leaned over to the cooler in the back seat next to her luggage and grabbed at us. She poured black liquid from one immaculate container into another. Beneath the hum of the engine, a sense of unease started to creep in, but my bone-deep exhaustion silenced any doubts that might have surfaced. I lifted my cup and took a swig of what should have been hot coffee. The metal flask looked almost pristine, which was an odd contrast to everything else in her belongings. I knew right away that something was wrong, because the liquid was only lukewarm at best and had an odd, earthy bitterness that was covered up by an overly sweet essence that left my tongue feeling uneasy. A moment later, as though a veil had lifted in front of me, panic took over as I realized what was happening, but it was too late. My eyelids grew heavy, my vision became blurry, and my limbs became weak and numb due to the adrenaline pumping through my veins and the foreign substance she had given me without hesitation. My grip on reality weakened, and desperation clawed at me as euphoria started to draw me into what seemed to be an eternal sleep. I woke up with a headache, and everything seemed strange until it all came back to me in a flash. My heart lurched in my chest, and my instincts told me to move, but my limbs were like dead weight, and my car was parked in the city. And then I fell into darkness. I went to the police to report the incident and tell them about her car. My wallet was stolen. It found out that the automobile had been stolen 2 weeks prior. And as of right now, Lisa, or whatever name she goes by, has not been apprehended. The environment was chilly and damp, and the weight of it was almost oppressive. A weather-beaten neon sign flickered hesitantly, boasting its location, the last stop before Willow Creek. Unfortunately, the moon was obscured by ominous clouds, casting an eerie, sinister luminescence upon a long-forgotten roadside diner that had surely seen more prosperous times. Despite my best efforts, I couldn't help but have the strong smell of stale coffee assaulted my nostrils as a stark reminder of all those hours spent on the road. The exhausting 16-hour drive had taken its toll on me, and the demanding delivery schedule had left me craving the bitter mixture I had come to love. My curiosity reached a peak, so I pushed the door open with an echoing creak inside. My life had not always revolved around truck driving, but in the face of hardship brought on by my father's failing construction business, I had no choice but to find an alternative source of income. After some time spent looking, I found this job and eventually came to terms with the fact that fatigue was slowly eating away at me, and that exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me completely. I've traveled the interstate highways of America for the past 7 years, seeing some amazing scenery and meeting some of the most fascinating people. But nothing compares to what happened that fateful night at the old diner. As my eyes adapted to the dim glow inside, I settled myself onto a stool at the counter. A gruff man named Frank emerged from behind the kitchen area shortly after. His apron was stained with grease, and he smiled solemnly, but it didn't reach his eyes, and asked what he could do for me. I had asked him for black coffee, and he had rubbed my eyes in vain to make me feel less tired. Frank nodded and continued. With other things to do, while I waited, I read through the wide range of people the diner had managed to attract. Among these weary souls was a couple huddled in a corner booth, their quiet conversation barely permeating the air, mostly blocked out by the ancient as my curiosity grew. I couldn't help but listen in on their conversation. The woman was thin and pale, and her eyes were full of fear as they darted around the room on guard. Her companions appeared to be much younger than her, but he was clearly nervous himself. He put a gentle hand on her shoulder as though to offer his attempts at consolation. An assurance seemed in vain as her voice trembled with fear. "He's coming for me. I know it." My attention was suddenly diverted from the couple when the front door creaked open and a tall, imposing figure entered, his leather jacket shifting menacingly with each step, his dark hair framing his chiseled jawline. Even a dog outside sensed the uneasiness within and let out a melancholy howl, unfazed by the Syrian atmosphere. But the stranger appeared first. Tensed into a resolute countenance, cruel eyes scanned the dimly lit room, unyielding and inhospitable, a palpable disquiet blanket of the diner's interior. Taking off his gloves and sitting on the empty stool beside me, the stranger's eyes met mine with a menacing gleam. "If I use your phone," he asked, his voice as rough and rugged as gravel. "Under tires." "Oh, sure, it's right there in the back," Frank stammered, pointing to when the stranger got up and walked purposefully toward the ancient payphone that was hanging carelessly on the far wall. He quickly dialed a number and impatiently awaited a response from the other end, but none would come. His temperament clearly changed, as frustration showed in angry tendrils. Across his expression, he slammed down on the receiver with such force that it left fractures in the plastic casing in the corner of the diner. A couple shrank back into themselves, as fear vibrated through them like an ominous warning. It was increasingly apparent that an unsettling air thickened within this once beloved neon-lit oasis, a place I had come for solace, but had instead found suffocation. but curiosity held me in place more than my desire to witness whatever horrifying events were about to happen in front of my eyes. Despite every instinct screened retreat, I remained engrossed in this impending catastrophe. "Hey," the savage stranger asked me a question that startled me. "Do you see any scared couples cowering around here?" The icy undertone in his voice suggested that there might be serious repercussions if I gave a false response. My lips played with lies that never left their house. How could fear torment my conscience for so long? Someone encouraged me in spite of my pounding heart. I hesitantly pointed to them and said, "Right over there," triumphantly snaking its way across his chiseled face in perfect synchronization. A malicious grin sent shivers down my spine as the stranger eyed the couple like a predator. The woman sobbed in sheer terror, her body shivering with fear. Her partner bravely attempted to stand ready to protect her from whatever fate and careful hands had in store, but it was in vain. The stranger was too swift and strong for such a heroic gesture, and as if by extension of his will, the knife pierced the man's stomach, killing the once perfect. Despite the fleeting chaos, time seemed to slow as I watched him roughly. The diner was filled with a deep and terrible shade of crimson pandemonium, as other patrons screamed and frantically ducked behind booths or fled the terrible violence that had suddenly consumed them. Rolling Marie toward the door, her futile efforts to resist dragging through an unsuspecting crowd paralyzed by a tempest of terror. Whirling around them, a burst of adrenaline flooded through me, like wildfire mixed with kerosene. Before I even knew what had possessed me, I was on my feet, launching myself towards the stranger with reckless abandonment. My fist struck his jaw in a display of unbridled ferocity, driven by raw emotion that had never before been known to me. The force threw him back, but he quickly regained his balance, and his eyes swelled like a lit match on coals soaked in gasoline. With a pharaoh growl rumbling deep inside his chest, he spat venomously at me and lurched for me with terrifying speed. Our battle was now starting in earnest, and the conflict raged like a crude, chaotic dance, with our fists colliding and our feet stomping and sliding against the worn linoleum floor. The clarity and precision behind my actions astounded me, but my deepest instincts are what motivate me now. With courage I never knew I had, I battled to save the woman and the innocent souls inside the diner's confined walls. As our battle progressed, I became acutely aware of an impending clamor. With a final snail and a blood-boiled glare, the stranger realized his time was running out and fled out the door into the darkness as red and blue lights flashed through the windows, casting sharp shadows on our faces as sirens pierced the night. The other customers started to emerge from hiding, each with overwhelming frank courage to call for assistance as others approached me, their faces full of gratitude but also etched with disbelief. Meanwhile, Marie collapsed at my side, her eyes wide with fear and disbelief as she whispered ragged words of gratitude between tense sobs, and more reinforcement poured into the diner. Paramedics followed suit, tending to those traumatized by recent events, and soon its worn corners were filled with a flurry of uniforms, intent on regaining order in this small corner of the world. Only then did I realize that my own adrenaline had masked my injuries sustained during my arduous fight, and the officers took official counts of as that fateful night unfolded. We pieced together eyewitness accounts and tried to piece together what had happened during those hazy hours. With each recounting, we learned that the stranger was a dangerous criminal for hire who had been looking for Marie to learn about his contractor's illegal activities. It was only a matter of time until my route took me through the barren deserts of Arizona. As the sun sank below the horizon, painting the landscape in hues of crimson and gold, I could almost taste the uneasiness in the air. Don't get me wrong, I've driven these highways for years, but I've heard stories about this stretch of road that winds through the rocky terrain, a snake slithering through hell. There were difficulties in Oregon, Washington, and even the rough and tumble icy roads of Alaska. But something about Route 191 made me feel as though I was going to confront the demons of Dante's Inferno. The hairs on my arms stood on end as I began to ascend into the mountains, My name is John Sullivan, and ever since I've been driving long-haul trucks since my divorce 2 years ago, because I find that the vastness of America's landscape calms my soul. I've met some fascinating people along the way, but I've also met some unsettling souls who have left their mark on me. One of those encounters was on this exact route, and I remember it as if it were yesterday. In Clifton, Arizona, I had made a brief stop at a little diner before beginning the perilous switchbacks on Route 191. When I went in and sat down at the Roses, I saw that it was a haven for truckers trying to refuel their rigs and themselves. I ordered my usual black coffee and a plate of scrambled eggs with toast, trying to ignore the older man who seemed unable to take his eyes off me as I finished my meal. But I couldn't quite place why until I noticed him sitting alone in the back corner nursing a cup of coffee. He asked in a gravely strained voice, shuffling across the diner's worn floor, "Gonna be heading up the Devil's Highway tonight, huh?" "Yeah," I said, trying not to show my discomfort. "I've got a delivery in New Mexico, so I'll be on 191 for a while." "John Sullivan, right?" he pressed, making my heart skip a beat. "I'm just an old trucker myself named Jed Matthews, just watching out for one of the good ones," he replied with a scary grin. "How do you know my name?" I screamed immediately on edge. Word travels fast around here. The conversation took an odd turn as Jed related stories of his own terrifying Route 191 experiences, yet stories were a blend of superstition and folklore, and although I had no explanation, there were tales of wrecks, ghostly white figures flying by in the dark, and the stench of death that seemed to permeate the air. I doubted his sincerity, because I've learned from my own experiences that fear can skew the truth. "John, I won't mince words," Jed said. "This stretch of road is cursed. It's taken the lives of many truckers, and it'll take more before it's through. You'd be wise to listen to someone who's been there and come out the other side." I nodded, trying to conceal the unease that his stories had stirred within me. I thanked Chad for the advice and paid my bill, eager to be on my way as I climbed into the cab of my truck and began to navigate the winding roads. I tried to put yet stories out of the isolation of Route 191 felt like a physical weight pressing on me as the night went on, but for a while it was working. The darkness seemed to close in around me, and the shadows played tricks on my eyes, making me jump at every rustle in the brush or flash of movement beside the road. The first indication of trouble was a pair of headlights that appeared around a bend, moving erratically, weaving in and out of the lanes. It was hard to breathe, and it was well past midnight. I slowed my truck and gripped the steering wheel tightly as the other vehicle approached. As the car blasted past, I saw a glimpse of the driver, a gaunt, wild-eyed man with a manic smile on his face made my heart race, and I couldn't get rid of the feeling that I had just met the real monster. I persisted in trying to get as far away from the madman as I could, but the night wasn't finished with me yet. An hour later, as I turned another bend in the road, I noticed a body stretched out in my lane. My foot slammed on the brakes, and my truck screeched to a stop inches from the still body. My breath caught in my throat as I got out of the truck, blowing my hair and filling the crisp night air with the smell of diesel fuel. As I got closer to the body, I could see that it was a woman who had been battered, bruised, and my mind immediately connected her to that crazy-eyed driver I had seen earlier, and I knew I had to get her to safety. Her eyes fluttered open as I knelt next to her, and I could see the horror there. "Please," she muttered, her voice barely audible. "Help me. He's coming back." Also realized that I couldn't just abandon her in the middle of the road, so I decided right away to take her with me in the truck until we got to a town where she could get assistance. While I was finishing my third cup of coffee, I was talking to some truck drivers, and during my break, we were telling each other about our road trip experiences when Iguana Jim, so named because of his wall-to-wall tattoo of when he said, "Hey, has anyone driven through Brown County, Indiana?" That's a weird little corner of the country, if you ask me. I hadn't been there before, but Greg, a middle-aged driver, who claimed to spend more time on the road than at home, laughed. An iguana wrapped around his right bicep piped up with excitement. I decided to drive through Brown County on my next trip east after Jim mentioned that the place had a humorous atmosphere. My curiosity was piqued, and I set out later that evening. The first few hours of the highway were boring compared to the excitement of discovering new territory. Atypical. And as darkness encircled the road, street lights gradually began to fade until they vanished completely. The cab smelled like stale cigarettes and clutch rags covered in grease. I took another sip of my lukewarm coffee and started listening to the radio for anything other than static. But Brown County didn't seem to at first glance. The shadows cast by the trees along the winding country roads appeared to be extraordinary. They danced like phantoms in my headlights, and as I came to a deserted intersection, I noticed that at least 3 cars were abandoned alongside the road in various states of chaos. Wing mirrors were broken on gravel shoulders, and their engines were cut dead in the middle. I felt uneasy, but I had no excuse not to drive on. These things weren't completely unusual on rural highways. As I drove, I saw more and more abandoned cars, but I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something evil was lurking there. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life as a voice I didn't recognize said, "Hey, it looks like you're new around here." It was a friendly and calm voice, but the oddity of this unexpected interaction made me uneasy. I hesitated before answering, attempting to dismiss my worries with a shrug. Maintain my composure. "Oh yeah, first time in these parts, just passing through." "Now," the mysterious voice replied with the sinister chuckle, "I hope you buckle up. It's going to be one hell of a ride." However, as information about these abandoned cars started to circulate among locals during all of my chat sessions over cheap plastic coffee cups, my curiosity turned to horror. Late one night, while transporting a heavy load along that desolate section of county road, I saw a young woman calling for assistance next to her steaming car. Even though my better judgment was telling me to keep going, I couldn't stop thinking about my sweetheart from home, and I pulled over and cautiously went up to her. She was pretty, but she looked tired, and her eyes were flashing with fear. "Please," she whispered urgently, "I need your assistance. I've been stuck here for hours," and she said. Her words seized up as headlights suddenly burst forward from behind. Panic struck, and instinct took over. I plugged a woman into my taxi while speed dialing 911 on my cell phone, and before I could tell them where we were or what was going on, she quickly urged me to put the gas pedal on before they got reluctantly. I pushed the engine to its limit as my other driver's warnings and terrifying tales rattled through my mind. Reluctantly, another truck appeared in the rearview mirror, tailgating us like a gory spectre. As they gained ground, the woman identified herself as the sister of one of the previous victims. She had come looking for answers, but discovered just minutes before fate brought us together. My heart was on fire as the pickup truck pursued us through the twisting roads of Brown County. The woman, who identified herself as Sarah, sobbed and shuddered in the passenger seat, pleading with me to drive faster, but the weight of the load I was carrying made it impossible. It was hard to accelerate any farther, and the highwayman's car was getting closer to our lives, edging closer to peril with each second that went by. Suddenly, a voice crackled over the radio once more, saying, "You can outrun us." The man whispered ominously, "Pull over, and we might let you live." I looked at Sarah and reassured her. Sarah nodded, wiping tears from her eyes as she continued to dial 911, only to have her calls constantly drop due to poor reception. Our pursuers' headlights filled my mirrors, illuminating their malevolent intentions. I told her to remain calm, and that I wasn't going to give up without a fight. As we approached the bend, I quickly downshifted, letting out a roar from my engine. As its RPM spiked, the sudden noise made Sarah jump in fear. I knew the road ahead quite well, and remembered an especially shocked bend up ahead, perfect for catching my pursuers off guard. The highwaymen screamed past us, unable to slow down in time to make the turn themselves, With our hearts racing and adrenaline pumping through our bodies, we listened as their vehicle skidded off course and finally collided with an obstacle in the distance. "Just hold on," I cried, before abruptly swerving onto the shoulder of the road obscured by overgrown foliage. I used this brief respite to call the police again, finally catching a signal. Reports of previous attacks had already put them on high alert, and the dispatcher told us that help was on its way. Cautiously, we peered out from under the foliage and saw their truck leaning against a large tree. Its twisted metal was illuminated by headlights that now flickered menacingly. Despite the temptation to confront our potential attackers head-on, we knew it was best to wait for law enforcement. A wave of relief passed over us as distant sirens signaled that salvation was near, and the police quickly arrived, apprehending the injured criminals with little opposition. In the hours that followed, we made our statements and waited. There were many questions, but one as Sarah and I parted ways later that night, it became clear that the highwaymen were not merely thieves or joyriders, but rather cult-like fanatics who believed their ritualistic attacks cleansed their victims from corruption in a violent metamorphosis. The only way we had survived tragedy tonight was by banding together. She thanked me profusely for being there for her when she needed help the night after our amazing near-death experience. Grief was still plaguing her, understandably, but glimmers of hope started to paint her eyes again, so I asked her hesitantly as we stood in front of her car, "Do you think you'll ever come back to Brown County?" "I don't know," she said softly. As I got back into my truck, I felt a sense of accomplishment, not only for surviving this terrifying experience, but also for knowing that Sarah would no longer be alone in this situation. I bit her lower lip, but perhaps next time under better circumstances. We exchanged contact information and silently agreed to at least try visiting one another down the line in calmer settings. I've had my share of strange experiences, but none quite like this one. It started with a regular journey from Nevada to Oregon, traveling through the desert in search of information regarding her missing sister, a foreign driver. Naturally, driving for extended periods of time can help you get ahead of schedule, but on lonely nights like these, my best friend is my trusty radio. I usually just listen to talk shows or late-night comedies to keep myself entertained. My name is Cole Harrison, and I was born and raised in Reno, Nevada. You could say it runs in the family, because my dad was a truck driver as well, but let me get back to the story, since that's why you came here. I'm traveling through eastern Oregon on a remote section of Highway 395 when I see this old, beat-up pickup truck stopped on the side of the road with its lights on. Although I usually keep to myself out here, something about the side of that truck forced me to apply the brakes and stop behind it. Two men, Dave and Rob, were standing next to it, and they introduced themselves as exhausted and in need of assistance. Dave had short dark hair and glasses, and he looked like your typical, they said, they were going to their cabin out in the woods and thanked me profusely for stopping to help them. They insisted they weren't hitchhikers, but campers having terrible luck with their ride breaking down. Rob was an exhausted office worker who had just finished a 60-hour work week. He had long blonde hair pulled back into a ponytail and a sunburned face that told me he would spend more than a few hours outdoors. After some hesitation, I decided not to abandon them stranded on this lonely road and told them to get in. As we drove north, they didn't say much, but it was obvious they were having some problems with that old truck. I couldn't help but be curious about their cabin retreat, so I inquired about the Rob, then disclosed that they were traveling to the Olvar Desert, a remote region located deep within Harney County. For those of you who are unfamiliar with this region of Oregon, it is big and barren. We're talking about miles of scorched earth with little to no human activity for long stretches of time, so it's not exactly a welcoming place. It turned out that Dave and Rob worked together at a construction site and had grown close over time. They took annual cabin retreats as a way to escape the routine of their jobs. As the night went on, the campers' conversation grew more personal, and eventually, covered more personal subjects like families, jobs, and old memories. But the more we talked, the more obvious it became that something wasn't adding up here. They were vague about some things and discreetly shifted the topic whenever I became too interested. It was well past midnight when we finally arrived at a seemingly innocent gas station off Highway 78, where I stood by the fuel tank of my truck and decided it was time to fill up and use the restroom. When I saw how anxiously Dave kept shifting in his seat while talking to Rob outside their broken-down pickup truck, my uneasiness increased. Their faces were no longer simply tired. They were tense and wary. When I returned to my truck after a brief stop, I discovered Rob searching through one of my bags in the back seat with an unexpected surge of rage pulsing through them. Rob said menacingly, "We're not exactly on a cabin retreat out here," and I tried to keep my hands steady. As the cold blade pressed against my throat, I demanded an explanation from him, but all of a sudden, his friendliness vanished, and he quickly withdrew a knife. My heart pounded as Rob's words replayed in my mind. I was in danger and needed to figure out how to get out as calmly as possible. I asked, "What do you want from me?" Dave replied, "Joining us by the truck, and after that you'll never see us again." I had no choice but to comply. The journey took an excruciatingly long time, with every mile filled with unbearable tension. As we drove deeper into the Alvord Desert, I learned more about their dark business. They were a part of a criminal organization involved in human trafficking. Rob kept his knife pressed against my throat while Dave got into the driver's seat. My mind raced as I tried to figure out how to escape, knowing that once we arrived at our destination, my life would be in grave danger. Eventually, an opportunity presented itself when we stopped at another remote cabin, which was actually a secret drop-off point where they would exchange their illegally obtained cargo. As they approached the gas station to pay for the fuel, Rob turned away to watch him. Taking advantage of this brief distraction, I slammed my elbow into his stomach and forced the knife out of his hands. After years of operating heavy equipment and moving large objects, my physical strength helped me overwhelm Rob, who slumped against the side of the truck. After a long, restless night of driving, I returned to civilization and promptly informed the local police of my terrifying experience. My heart was thumping frantically in my chest as I slammed the door shut and drove away from the gas station as quickly as I could, leaving them both behind in the dark of that remote desert. After a few days, detectives found the hidden cabin and arrested several high-ranking members of the criminal organization, exposing the illicit activities taking place there. It turns out that my near-death experience may have saved the lives of numerous victims who would have otherwise perished. The police launched an investigation using the limited information they had, and the shock of the encounter was starting to set in. As for Dave and Rob, they were eventually found at the exact gas station where I had made my daring escape. It appears that they had been waiting there 4 days in the hopes of regaining control of their pickup truck and carrying out their illegal activities. After being handcuffed and informed of their rights, they would be held accountable for their evil deeds. And as for me, even though I had become a hero to my fellow truck drivers and the local police force, I still couldn't get rid of the terrifying memories of that terrible drive and the once comfortable sound of comedy and late-night talk shows on my radio. Only acts as eerie reminders, so I quit driving trucks because I wasn't sure I could live on those desolate highways after everything I had been through. I found comfort in a job closer to home, and it seemed safer that way, especially late at night when I was sleeping. One thing is certain: no one could possibly predict what would happen when we make the fateful decision to stop, to offer assistance on those dark roads under the stars. I still find myself thinking about that lonely stretch of highway where life took an unexpected turn, and even though it's impossible to imagine what might have happened if I hadn't fought back. Throughout my more than 15 years of experience, I have witnessed many strange situations, near misses, and even some encounters with wildlife, but one incident in particular has stuck in my memory to this day. It happened on a typical night while I was transporting cargo. My name is Roger Farnsworth, and I was 36 years old when this tale happened. I had been married to my lovely wife, Angela, for just over 10 years, and we had a daughter, Emily, who was 7 years old. My business required me to travel far from home on a regular basis, so it was a constant challenge for our family to make up for my absence. I made sure to bring back special souvenirs for Emily from each trip, and Angela and I cherished every moment we spent together. The weather was cold and dark as I traversed the rural region in Pennsylvania. Snaking roads seemed endless, engulfed by the pervasive darkness. Driving 4 hours on end, with only the radio host to keep me company, had become the norm by this point. As I navigated the desolate roads, while listening to a late-night talk show, I noticed a figure by the side of the road ahead. At first, I thought it was just a poor driver in need of help, but as I got closer, I realized it was a young woman wearing. It wasn't like me to pick up strangers in such desolate places while wearing a jacket and carrying a cardboard sign that read hitchhiker in big, sloppy letters. But something about this girl made me stop. She gratefully climbed into the truck's cabin, her body shivering from the cold night air, and introduced herself as Cassandra, expressed her gratitude for my act of kindness, and revealed that she was traveling to a nearby town to meet her sister. As we talked about a variety of topics, I couldn't help but feel uneasy because the light-hearted atmosphere we tried to create seemed to be overshadowed by something darker. Meanwhile, the forested surroundings outside the truck became increasingly, despite being a familiar route, the fog and darkness made it feel uncomfortably different at night. I tried to control my steadily rising heart rate while gripping the wheel tightly, telling myself that it was just fatigue-induced paranoia. By this time, Cassandra had fallen silent and was staring out into the thick fog, as though looking for something. She suddenly gasped and pointed to a distant silhouette. Peering through the murky veil of fog that encircled us, I could just make out a tall, thin man with a long coat and an overhang hat. He stayed motionless while I slammed on the truck's brakes, making a shark scream sound that came to an abrupt stop mere inches from him, uncontrollably muttering, "What the hell?" My heart was racing frantically, and I had beads of sweat on my forehead. The enigmatic man held his ground, showing no signs of movement or emotion, his face hidden beneath the hat's brim, but I could feel Cassandra was clearly upset by this unsettling experience. Her erratic breathing and wide-eyed terror revealed her panic-stricken state. She whispered tremulously, "Who is this strange figure out in the road?" "I don't know, Kane," I said hesitantly. His penetrating gaze sent chills down my spine. Instead of reversing my truck and speeding away, I unbuckled my seatbelt and carefully opened the door. My feet hit solid ground as I found myself engulfed in the swirling fog like a tornado. Even though every fiber of my being begged me to run from this unsettling scene, despite these overwhelming feelings of dread that threatened to incapacitate me, an unnatural creature was hiding in the shadows, and there was an oppressive atmosphere that I found difficult to ignore. I yelled, doing my best to project authority, asking if the man would be so kind as to leave the road. He did not stir or speak. Instead, he just stood there with his face hidden. Cassandra saw her knuckles whiten as she gripped the edge of the seat under the shadows created by his hat from inside the truck's cab. She was clearly terrified, thinking that she couldn't be alone with this enigmatic figure either. "What is it that you seek?" I asked myself, feeling a growing uneasiness in my chest. The man finally said, "I need transportation," in a rough voice that seemed to cut through the fog. At that moment, Cassandra begged me desperately from behind me, "Roger, please get back inside and let us depart from this place." My instincts told me to follow her advice, but I decided against it. Made a pivotal choice that would follow me around forever. I gestured for the stranger to get into our car, and he came silently, jumping into the back seat of the taxi. Cassandra moved uncomfortably away from him, her eyes fixed on every action he took. his wide-brimmed hat still casting a murky shadow over his face. I returned to my position behind the wheel and put my foot on the accelerator again. The cab's atmosphere thickened with tension. It manifested like a living being, both oppressive and stifling. Several moments ticked by an unnerving silence before Cassandra broke it with caution. "Have yet to disclose your name," the enigmatic passenger then leaned. Before I could reply, Cassandra took a switchblade out of her pocket and pressed it firmly against my lips. He said, "Names hold little significance." With a disconcerting calmness, he lowered his hat just enough for us to finally see his face, a wicked smile that split his lips apart. My heart pounded as the cold steel sank into my skin. "You'd be more cautious of the silent ones," she confided in my ear, her innocent manner vanishing. "We've been doing this for a while, preying on good-hearted people like you. Go ahead and drive, and don't do any foolish antics," the man ordered. "Transport us to your next destination with terrifying severity." As I drove on, feeling helpless, thoughts of Angela and Emily tormented me, and the possibility that I would never see them again seemed all too real. As the sun slowly rose above the horizon, the fog began to dissipate. The man led me to what looked to be an abandoned warehouse, their hideout where gullible victims were robbed of their valuables and then left for dead. As I parked by the bleak building, Cassandra's hold on me remained firm, with her knife in hand, exposing the full extent of our depressing surroundings. As desperation grew inside of me, I realized that my window of opportunity for escape was rapidly closing, and my heart raced with anticipation and fear began to leave me inside, crossing the threshold into the darkness beyond, leaving me facing an uncertain future with only one certainty: I would regret this fateful decision for the rest of my life. I felt the unsettling sensation of being trapped, gradually constricted around me like a vice. But in the middle of this chaotic whirlwind of thoughts and emotions, I suddenly realized that the stakes were extremely high, and that one mistake could spell disaster. We were getting closer to the entrance. Saw a partially hidden metal pipe next to an old wooden crate that glimmered with the promise of salvation. Determined to fight back against my captors and gain my freedom, I decided in a split second to grab this potential lifeline with all the grace I could muster. I lunged toward the pipe in a single fluid movement, snatching it up just as we reached the entrance before Cassandra could react, and using all of my strength, I brought the heavy pipe down on her skull. He crumpled to the ground like a marionette whose strings had been abruptly cut, and her limp body slumped onto the floor, creating a spooky scene that contrasted sharply with our grim surroundings. Desperate to escape my captivity and feeling more confident after my recent act of defiance, I turned my attention to the last threat, the man who accompanied Cassandra on this sinister mission. He had already started to reach for a weapon hidden inside his trench coat, but he was too slow to respond to my with unwavering resolve driving my actions. I swung the pipe again without hesitation. Its impact on his temple was swift and vicious, like Cassandra before him, and his now dead body crumpled lifelessly onto the cold concrete floor, sending a rush of adrenaline through my body. With my moment of freedom approaching and my captors momentarily incapacitated, I ran back to the comfort of my truck as fast as my legs would carry me. This shared experience of mental and physical exhaustion threatened to overthrow me. But there was one crucial task that required my immediate attention: notifying emergency personnel of my location and that of my incapacitated enemies. Despite the seemingly insurmountable obstacles in my path, I was able to make a call to 911 during my frantic flight in hushed, hurried tones tinged with terror, relaying what limited details I could give about where we were, knowing full well that every second counted in guaranteeing Cassandra and her group's swift capture. After an hour of navigating a maze of winding roads and sharp turns, salvation finally materialized in the form of flashing red and blue lights on a fleet of police cruisers. They had arrived right in the middle of when Cassandra and her accomplice were captured by local authorities. I felt a wave of relief like a torrential downpour, cleansed from the sins they had cast upon me. I had been eager to offer their assistance and obtain vital information regarding the evil deeds committed by my captives turned captors. Despite staring into the abyss, I was revived by an inexplicable sense of hope for a better tomorrow. My survival against all odds provided convincing evidence that, even in the darkest moments of life, hope can be found where the will to endure remains steadfast. In a world full of uncertainty and shadows, it is those who find the courage to confront their fears, and I now understand that each of us possesses a strong reservoir of inner strength that we must draw upon in times of overwhelming trials and tribulations. Rather than succumbing to adversity, we have the option and necessity to choose to overcome it. When I met Hank Newland, another truck driver, who we would later call Old Hank, it was early June. I had just completed unloading a delivery in El Paso, Texas, and he was an experienced driver with a wealth of anecdotes about life on the road. Some could even say he was an old soul. At a diner close to the truck stop, we struck up a conversation. Old Hank told us stories about his early years spent in a small Arkansas town and how he got into trucking. Since we were both truckers, we bonded over our love of the open road and limitless adventure, but I had no idea how dangerous it would be. We then called it quits and went back to our individual trucks for some rest. The evening went smoothly, but as we both started our engines for another long haul the following night, neither of us could have prepared for what would happen. The late hours of the night took me on a winding route through the barren stretches of Arizona desert. We exchanged phone numbers and agreed to stay in touch. My only source of excitement, aside from battling the boring terrain, was listening to podcasts or watching videos from dash cams that documented unforeseen incidents. About 50 miles into my drive, I spotted a broken down car on the shoulder, old and battered, spewing smoke with its hazards flashing. Due to caution, I slowed down and saw a couple flagging me down in clear need of help. They were disheveled but seemed truly in need. I was hesitant to stop my truck just in front of their stalled car, but Micah informed me that something wasn't right. Being a kind person who thought it was important to help people whenever possible, I rolled down my window to inquire about the help they required. I offered to contact a AA or give them some cash for petrol, as they could find a nearby gas station, but they insisted on hitching a ride to the next town. The man stated that they were out of gas and that their battery was dying as well. The woman was pregnant and was experiencing contractions, which made me feel uncomfortable. Heartstrings enough to overcome my initial reservations, so I decided to let them ride along with me, telling them to jump into the sleeper bunk for safety. The man smiled nervously and introduced himself as Jacob, and the woman said her name was Emily. They climbed into the back and muttered their thanks as I turned onto the highway, but I couldn't get rid of the growing unease after deciding to check on my unexpected guests. I was shocked to see Jacob searching through my belongings as I was making my way to the sleeper. Before I could react, a sharp pain shot through my head and everything went dark. When consciousness returned, I found myself bound in the back of the truck. After several futile attempts, reality set in, and Emily and Jacob had taken control of my car. I blinked, sweat trickling from my brow, unable to comprehend the gravity of the situation, feeling helpless and confined in my own truck as panic tightened around my chest like a vice. My head ached from the previous blow, but that was the least of my worries because I had to get out before Emily and Jacob did something much worse. I frantically tried to unfasten my bonds, trying every possible position, and with every attempt, I realized that these people were far more sinister than they had initially seemed. Hours passed as the truck rumbled along its menacing course, and then I heard a phone ring. Old Hank's name flashed on the screen of the mobile phone that was lying on the floor within arm's reach. The ropes that helped me were strategically bound at every turn, seizing any chance of escaping without assistance. I realized then that he might be my only hope for freedom. Overcome by adrenaline, I gathered all of my remaining strength and cautiously made my way to the phone, being careful not to exert a great deal of effort, using my constrained voice to press the answer button on the side. Hank could hear me say through gritted teeth as my hands pushed it closer to my face. When my lips met his on speaker mode, I muttered, "Old Hank," panting. "Pay close attention, I was abducted. And they took me hostage. Call for assistance," fear filling his voice. Hank cursed under his breath while promising help. There was no doubt in my mind that Jesus would provide for me at that very moment. However, as we conversed, I felt a chill that I hadn't seen or heard before. What were Emily and Jacob planning for a while now that they couldn't consider their twisted goals further? We hung up, and I waited without them realizing that I had made touch with Hank, as if detecting a problem, and ultimately made an unexpected "Are you comfortable with your appearance?" Jacob whispered, a smile creeping across his face is twisted and excessively big. "We've just arrived at our Emily." The destination stood behind him and gazed down at me with her dead eyes, filled with poison. The former appearance of a defenseless, expectant mother has disappeared. The truck had pulled over miles away from onlookers, and beyond all odds, we had arrived at my Jacob pulled me out of the truck and into what would be my last resting spot. The desolate desert terrain, Emily trailing closely behind, and chilly perspiration trickled down my back as time seemed to drag on. I waited for whatever terrible destiny they had in store for me, endlessly, and the memories of my life came flooding back like a slideshow of bittersweet memories. When all hope seemed lost, a slow, visceral mirage arose, seemingly out of nowhere. Old Hank's huge truck roaring toward us from behind a rock formation was the last thing I could have envisioned. Hope swept through me again, oxygen being suddenly added to a wildfire. Around us, Jacob, the tires churned up dust and plumes, from Arizona as the engine roared, understood the game was over, but he didn't immediately give up. Instead, he started a vicious as Old Hank emerged from his rig. He was taken aback but unfazed by the frenzied rush toward him. With remarkable strength that belied his age, Jacob's onslaught Old Hank fatally outmaneuvered him. While the two men engaged in a titanic combat, Emily charged in the direction of her expression was etched with hate, but I was able to stop her before she could get to me. Any actual damage, a black SUV that was unmarked and armed federal officers leaping out of it. Their appearance turned the tables in a matter of seconds. Emily now having been arrested, Old Hank's load was lessened during the battle with Jacob. I looked around me, trying to process everything. Considering how Hank managed to set up a rescue so swiftly and expertly, I noticed among the agents an unusual he had brought up Eli Hank's estranged nephew at the diner that evening. That must be how it all happened so coincidentally, like an unseen danger. In the end, we stopped Jacob and Emily's terror attack at night. Their lengthy criminal past of carjacking and murder on America's desolate highways was later discovered, leaving a disturbing trail of stealing other trucks and murdering their drivers in their wake. Being friends with Hank was such a blessing.